Elvis Presley, an icon, a legend, the king of rock and roll. But what if I told you the man who changed music forever was tormented by a truth darker than the stage lights? A truth so powerful, it eventually consumed him. From the glittering spotlight to the hollow solitude behind closed doors, Elvis Presley's life was both a dream and a nightmare. A tale of a boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, who became the voice of a generation, only to be consumed by the very fame that made him. His voice was unlike anything the world had ever heard. It broke boundaries, it defined eras, and it birthed a new era in music that transcended race, culture, and class. But behind that voice, behind those rhinestone jumpsuits and seductive gyrations, was a man who could hardly recognize himself. For every scream of adoration that echoed from the crowd, there was a silence waiting to swallow him whole. Born into poverty, Elvis had a singular desire from the very beginning: escape. His family's struggles with financial hardship left deep scars on him, and music became his one ticket to a different world, one where he could shed the weight of his past. But what he never expected was the weight that fame would carry, a weight heavier than anything he had ever known. In the early years, it felt like the stars were aligning. The world fell in love with Elvis, and his fame skyrocketed in ways that no one could predict. But with every success, the pressure mounted. The pressure to maintain the image, to live up to expectations, to be perfect. And it wasn't just about the public's perception. It was about Elvis's own struggle with his identity, the constant battle with loneliness, the addiction that crept up like a shadow. How did the brightest star in America's history, a man who revolutionized music and pop culture, fall so far? What was the cost of greatness? The answers aren't just found in the glittering applause or the endless sea of records. The truth, the untold story, lies in the silence that followed his last breath, a silence that speaks volumes about the price of fame. This is the untold story of Elvis Presley, the rise, the struggles, the legacy, a tale of fame's dark underbelly. Elvis Aaron Presley was born on January 8, 1935, in a small, dilapidated house on the wrong side of the tracks in Tupelo, Mississippi. His twin brother, Jesse Garon, was stillborn, leaving Elvis to navigate life as an only child. His mother, Gladys Presley, was his world, a protective, deeply nurturing woman who would shape his heart, his music, and his very understanding of love. From the start, life wasn't kind. Elvis's family lived in poverty, a constant struggle against financial instability that left them reliant on others for basic needs. His father, Vernon Presley, was arrested for forging a check when Elvis was just a boy, sending the family into a deeper spiral of hardship. His early memories were of cramped living spaces, inadequate meals, and the desperate wish to escape the world that seemed to conspire against them. Yet, in the midst of this suffocating poverty, there was one constant that Elvis could cling to: music. It wasn't just an escape, it was a lifeline. In church, he heard the powerful rhythms of gospel music, melodies that were both a source of solace and strength. But it wasn't just gospel. It was the blues and the rhythms of African American culture that truly spoke to his soul. His childhood was filled with the sounds of black musicians who, despite the segregation of the time, crafted a music that transcended race. From legendary bluesman B.B. King to the voices of his gospel choir, these were the melodies that built the foundation for Elvis's sound. At the age of 10, Elvis received his first guitar, a gift from his mother that was as much a sign of hope as it was a reflection of their financial struggles. There was no piano in the house, no grand instruments, but a guitar, simple and worn, would become his escape. He would spend hours alone in his room, strumming away, trying to capture the sounds that he heard in his heart. By the time he was a teenager, his love for music had transformed into a quiet obsession. But the pressures of growing up in a racially segregated America weighed heavily on him. He was always different. His love for black music, a genre considered taboo by many at the time, put him at odds with his peers. Elvis didn't fit the mold of what a typical white boy from the South was supposed to be. He wasn't interested in the traditional country music that many of his contemporaries gravitated toward. He was captivated by the sounds of black gospel and blues. Yet, he was still an outsider, misunderstood by both sides of the racial divide. Elvis was a walking contradiction, straddling two worlds, but never fully belonging to either. He was deeply ashamed of his family's poverty, yet that very poverty fueled his hunger to escape. The dreams of fame, fortune, and the adoration of millions were the fire that kept him going. He believed that if he could just make it out, if he could just get his music into the world, he could finally prove his worth, not only to the world, but to himself. His drive to succeed was more than a desire for fame. It was a psychological need to break free from the emotional and financial shackles of his upbringing. It was a hunger that intensified as he grew older, pushing him further down a path that would ultimately cost him everything. But with success came isolation. As Elvis entered adulthood, he began to gain recognition for his musical talent. But even then, there was a strange, nagging loneliness that followed him wherever he went. There were no guarantees in his life. Fame didn't guarantee happiness. It only guaranteed the constant pressure to perform. Every day, the weight of expectations, his own and the world's, grew heavier. And still, no one understood the turmoil that raged inside him. His mother, Gladys, was his rock, but even her love couldn't fill the void. The emotional stakes were set. Elvis didn't just want to be famous. He needed to be famous. He needed validation, not only from the world, but from himself. The desperation to escape his past was so intense that it drove him toward a future that, for all its glitz and glamour, would come to haunt him. In every note he sang, in every record he made, there was an unspoken truth. For Elvis Presley, music was both salvation and destruction. In 1956, Elvis Presley was still an unknown name to many, but that would soon change in ways that even he could never have predicted. On January 27th, Elvis recorded Heartbreak Hotel at RCA Studios. This song, a melancholy ballad about a man who's been left broken by love, would become a worldwide sensation and the turning point in his career. When it hit the airwaves, it wasn't just a song, it was an earthquake that would shake the foundations of popular music forever. With the release of Heartbreak Hotel, the world quickly learned Elvis's name, and he became the face of rock and roll. Overnight, he was thrust into the spotlight. His image splashed across magazines, his face plastered on billboards, his voice echoing from every radio. The fame was intoxicating, but it was also suffocating. What many didn't realize was that Elvis wasn't just grappling with the weight of newfound celebrity. He was struggling to hold on to the very identity he'd spent years building. His rise to stardom was meteoric, and yet it was also terrifying. For the first time in his life, Elvis was no longer an unknown boy from Mississippi. He was a symbol, a larger-than-life figure who couldn't walk down the street without being mobbed. The pressure of constant scrutiny began to wear on him, especially when his performances took on a controversial edge. The way he moved on stage, those seductive gyrations, the thrust of his hips, was considered shocking, even scandalous. In conservative America, Elvis was accused of corrupting the youth, of inciting immoral behavior. The media and critics alike tried to box him in as the epitome of moral decay. Yet, at the same time, they couldn't deny his brilliance, his undeniable magnetism. But this backlash didn't just come from the establishment. The black community, whose music he had borrowed and blended with his own, saw him as a traitor. In a time when racial tensions ran high in the United States, Elvis was seen by some as exploiting African American culture for profit while maintaining the privilege of being a white man. Critics argued that he was capitalizing on a sound that was not his own, while others accused him of using black music to fuel his rise to fame without ever acknowledging its roots. To some, Elvis was a symbol of racial appropriation. To others, he was a hero, a bridge between two worlds. In the midst of it all, Elvis's personal conflicts were mounting. As his fame skyrocketed, so did the expectations placed upon him. He wasn't just a performer anymore, he was a cultural phenomenon. He had to maintain a perfect image, to be the ideal of American masculinity, to please everyone from his fans to his managers, to the media, to the government. This pressure began to eat away at him, manifesting in insecurities, self-doubt, and emotional instability. His relationship with his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, was a double-edged sword. While Parker had played an instrumental role in launching Elvis's career, his manipulation and control over Elvis's finances and personal life became more oppressive with time. Parker pushed Elvis to his limits, making decisions that prioritized profit over the well-being of the young star. Elvis, increasingly disillusioned with Parker's motives, began to question the cost of his fame. Was he just a puppet for the industry, or was he allowed to live for himself? At the same time, his personal life was falling apart. Elvis's relationship with his girlfriend, Priscilla Presley, was complicated and strained by his fame. They were young, and yet there was a significant emotional distance between them. Elvis was always on the road, away from her, consumed by his work and the pressures of stardom. Priscilla, too, was caught between being a loving partner and trying to understand the complexities of a man who was torn between public adoration and private despair. And then, the addiction began to take hold. Elvis, who had long been accustomed to using prescription drugs to manage the stress of his career, began to lean on them more heavily. His body became his battleground, a place where fame and addiction collided with tragic force. He was no longer just struggling with the expectations of the public, but with the growing realization that he could no longer control his own life. The rising tension within Elvis was palpable. His fame, which once felt like freedom, now felt like a gilded cage. As he built his empire, it became clear that it wasn't the external critics who were the true enemies, it was the war within himself. The internal battle for control, for identity, for validation, these were the true forces that threatened to undo him. The stage was set. The king of rock and roll, a man who had redefined music and culture, was now fighting the most brutal battle of his life, a fight against the very thing that had made him famous, fame itself. In 1958, just as Elvis's fame reached unimaginable heights, the unthinkable happened. The man who had redefined music, who had captivated millions with his raw, electrifying performances, was drafted into the United States Army. For many, this would have been a welcome reprieve from the intensity of fame, a chance to breathe, to escape the suffocating pressure. For Elvis, however, it was both a relief and a devastating disruption. At first, Elvis saw the draft as an opportunity to step away from the glaring spotlight. He needed a break from the never-ending cycle of performances, interviews, and the weight of being Elvis Presley. Yet, the Army wasn't just a time for rest, it was a time of reinvention and reckoning. He was no longer the king of rock and roll, the man who commanded the stage. He was now a private, just another soldier in a sea of uniforms. The world no longer needed him in the same way. The adoration of fans was replaced with the discipline of military life, and Elvis struggled to reconcile these two versions of himself. His time in the army was marked by internal conflict. Fame had defined him for so long that, without it, he found himself lost. It was as though a part of him had vanished. The man who once moved crowds with the mere swing of his hips now found himself performing mundane tasks, caught between his yearning for escape and the heavy weight of responsibility. His identity was in flux, and it was a harsh realization that fame, no matter how exhilarating, could never truly define who he was as a person. When he returned from Germany in 1960, the world had changed. Elvis had been absent from the stage for 2 years, and the music scene had evolved. The pressures that he had left behind were still waiting for him, and perhaps even greater than before. But Elvis was different. The man who left for the army was not the same man who returned. The toll of fame, combined with his internal struggles, left him fragile, and for the first time, Elvis felt the deep cracks in his carefully constructed persona. Elvis's return to the spotlight came in 1968 with the Comeback Special, a television performance that would go down in history as one of the most emotionally charged moments of his career. It wasn't just a performance, it was a reckoning. Elvis was no longer the young, vibrant star he once was. He had gained weight, his appearance was disheveled, and his movements lacked the fluid grace they once held. But in that special, something raw and vulnerable came through. There was an intensity in his eyes, a depth to his voice that cut through the years of hollow success. The special wasn't just a comeback, it was a confrontation with everything Elvis had been trying to outrun. The lyrics of the songs, the power in his voice, there was something unspoken behind every note. It was as if for the first time in years, he wasn't just singing for the audience, he was singing to himself. Each lyric held a mirror up to the man he had become, and Elvis was forced to face it. The fame, the addiction, the pressures, everything he had been running from came crashing down in that moment. The most powerful part of the Comeback Special wasn't his performance, it was the conversation that followed. In the backstage moments captured on camera, Elvis revealed a vulnerability that few had ever seen. "I've been to hell and back," he admitted. And in those words, the truth of his inner turmoil was laid bare for the world to see. His struggles with addiction, his feelings of isolation, the sense of being lost in his own fame, these were no longer secrets hidden behind the glitz and glamour. Yet, despite this emotional rebirth, Elvis couldn't escape the shadow of fame. The relief he felt in that moment of authenticity was short-lived. The pressure of maintaining the Elvis image, the expectations from his fans, from Colonel Parker, from the industry, these all weighed on him like a ton of bricks. He was still the king, but the crown was starting to feel unbearably heavy. The darker side of fame, the loneliness, the addiction, the constant battle to be what everyone else wanted him to be, was taking its toll. But in that brief moment, during the 1968 comeback special, Elvis Presley reminded the world of the brilliance that had first made him a star. He may have been lost, but he was not yet finished. And for the audience, it was a fleeting glimpse of the man who, despite everything, still had the power to command the stage. This was Elvis Presley, at his most vulnerable, his most authentic. It was his moment of confrontation, one last chance to be the person he truly was, free from the constraints of fame and the shackles of addiction. But as we would come to learn, this moment of clarity was temporary, and the internal battles that Elvis faced would continue to rage until the very end. The 1970s brought Elvis Presley to a breaking point. The king of rock and roll, once an untouchable symbol of youth, energy, and rebellion, was now a shadow of his former self. The same man who had once commanded crowds with his voice and presence was now isolated, struggling with his own mortality and the emotional toll of decades spent in the public eye. His fame, which had once lifted him to unimaginable heights, now seemed like a curse. In the final years of his life, Elvis spiraled into a deep personal crisis. His addiction to prescription drugs, which had started as a way to cope with the pressures of fame, now consumed him entirely. His health deteriorated rapidly. His once sharp features became bloated. His energy depleted. He was no longer the electrifying presence he had been in the 50s and 60s. Instead, he was a man trapped in his own body, his once charming voice now sounding raspy and hollow. But even as he battled his inner demons, Elvis continued to perform, his dedication to his fans never wavering. His concerts in the early 70s were a mix of brilliance and tragedy. There were moments of the old Elvis, the fire, the energy, the raw emotion that had once made him a legend. But these moments were fleeting. More often than not, his performances were marred by his physical decline. He struggled to keep up with the demands of the stage, and his personal life was in tatters. The once perfect image of Elvis Presley had cracked, revealing a man unable to escape the very world that had made him famous. At the same time, Elvis's relationship with his ex-wife Priscilla Presley remained strained. They had separated in 1972, but there was still an emotional tether between them. Elvis had been desperately lonely, but his inability to connect with others on a deeper level made it difficult for him to heal. He sought comfort in fleeting relationships, but nothing could replace the void that Priscilla's departure had left in his heart. His daughter, Lisa Marie, was growing up, and Elvis had become more of a distant figure in her life, a man defined by his fame rather than his role as a father. In August 1977, Elvis's physical and emotional decline came to a devastating head. On August 16th, at the age of 42, Elvis Presley was found dead in the bathroom of his Graceland mansion. His death was ruled as a heart attack, exacerbated by his long history of drug use and health issues. The world was stunned. Millions mourned the loss of a man who had shaped music and pop culture, but few truly understood the depth of his suffering. To the public, Elvis was a king, immortalized by his fame, but to those who knew him, he was a man broken by the very thing that had elevated him to the top. In the wake of his death, the public reaction was a mixture of shock, sadness, and disbelief. Elvis was more than a celebrity. He was an American icon, a symbol of an era that would never come again. People gathered at Graceland, the home that had once symbolized Elvis's rise, to mourn the loss of a man who had changed the course of history. His funeral was attended by thousands, with fans from all walks of life paying their respects to the man who had touched their hearts with his music. But despite the public mourning, Elvis's life and death remained shrouded in mystery. His struggles with addiction, his isolation, and his deep-seated insecurities were not fully understood until after his passing. Elvis had become a tragic hero, a man whose brilliance had been overshadowed by the darker sides of fame. The cost of greatness had been steep, and in the end, it was Elvis's own spirit that paid the price. Yet, as the years went by, Elvis's legacy only grew. His music continued to inspire generations, and his influence on rock and roll and popular culture remained undeniable. He was no longer just a celebrity. He had become a symbol of both the glory and the tragedy of fame. His rise to stardom had been meteoric, his fall inevitable, but in the end, Elvis Presley's impact on the world could not be erased. His story, marked by brilliance and despair, became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the fragile nature of fame and the deep personal cost that can come with it. For all his flaws, Elvis was a man who gave everything to his art, who sacrificed his soul for the adoration of millions. And in that sacrifice, he became more than just a king. He became a legend. Elvis Presley's story is one of paradox. He was a man who had everything: wealth, fame, admiration, and yet, in the quiet moments behind the curtains, he had nothing. His legacy is a reflection of the human condition. We yearn for success, for validation, for love, but at what cost? Elvis's life and death reveal the haunting truth about the price of fame. It's not all glamour and lights. It's a relentless struggle, a battle between who you are and who the world wants you to be. Fame is a double-edged sword. It lifts you to unimaginable heights, but it also drags you down into the depths of your own insecurities, addictions, and fears. Elvis's fall from grace is a cautionary tale of how fame, when unchecked, can consume even the brightest stars. But there is beauty in his story too. Despite his struggles, Elvis gave the world something that transcends time. His music, his voice, his energy, they live on. His influence can still be heard in every corner of pop culture, from the musicians who continue to draw inspiration from him to the millions who still listen to his records today. Elvis may have been broken by the very thing that made him a legend, but his impact cannot be erased. So, what do we learn from Elvis's life? Perhaps it is that we, as individuals, must be cautious of the allure of fame, of the obsession with perfection. We must understand that the human spirit is fragile, and that the pressures we place on ourselves, or that others place on us, can have a devastating impact. But perhaps more importantly, we must recognize that fame does not define us. What defines us is the love we give, the music we create, the relationships we build, and the legacy we leave behind. Not the adoration of millions, but the genuine connections we make with those who truly understand us. Elvis Presley's story is tragic, yes, but it is also a reminder of the human experience, the highs, the lows, the love, and the loss. It's a testament to the complexities of fame and the human spirit. And though Elvis is no longer with us, his legacy endures, forever etched into the fabric of history. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think Elvis's story teaches us about the cost of fame, the dangers of addiction, and the battle to stay true to ourselves? Share your thoughts below. And if you've learned something from this journey, don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold stories from the lives of the most iconic figures in history.